the UK graduate trainee visa is part of the global business mobility route, which was born on 11th of April 2022. This is for those who would like to do a temporary work assignment here in the UK, where they are on a graduate training program which leads to a managerial or specialist worker position. And this is where the employer from overseas requires them to do a work placement here in the UK. So I'm going to explain the procedure you need to follow. I'm going to show you how you can meet the suitability requirements and the eligibility requirements. The eligibility requirements, as you will see, consist of two parts, the points-based requirements and non-points-based requirements. And at the end of this video, I'm going to explain what conditions all successful applicants will need to meet after their visa is granted. So let us begin. Those who apply for the graduate trainee visa will need to meet three requirements: the validity requirements, the suitability requirements, and the eligibility requirements. We can subdivide the validity requirements into two parts. First of all, the applicants will need to follow a certain procedure. And secondly, if they're applying from the UK, the decision makers will be ensuring that they are not switching from one of these categories. So if you are in the UK as a visitor, or as a short-term student, or as a parent of a child student, or as a seasonal worker, as a domestic worker in a private household, or if you made your application outside the immigration rules and it was allowed, you will not be able to switch to the UK graduate trainee visa. In these circumstances, you will be expected to leave the country and apply from outside the UK. With regards to the procedure, there are 5 steps. The first one, of course, the application form. All applications are online now. If you're applying from outside the UK, you'll need to complete the form, which is called a Global Business Mobility Visa. And if you're applying in the UK, the same form, but without the word visa, so Global Business Mobility. The second one is paying the fee, which is only £259, and all applicants will also be expected to pay the immigration health surcharge. So the main applicant will be paying, who is over the age of 18, will be paying £624. If we have a dependent of the main applicant who is under the age of 18, let's say if a child is applying as a dependent of the graduate trainee applicants, they will be paying a reduced fee of £470 per year. Then all applicants will need to prove their nationality, their age, and also their identity, which can only be done with the help of a passport. Unfortunately, IDs are no longer accepted, and all applicants will have to prove that they're over the age of 18. The next step is to submit your biometrics, which is fingerprints and a scan and a photo of your face. And the final step only applies to those who apply from outside the UK. So this is for someone who makes an entry clearance application. In non-legal words, this is when you make your visa application from outside the UK. Only those who live in the countries which are on Appendix T. Let me show you how you can find this. So if you go to your browser and type Appendix T, and the first website, .gov.uk website, is going to be the one which you need. So here you will find a list of all the countries where the residents will be required to do a TB test and submit a tuberculosis test certificate with the application. If you are a resident of this country, but you are a national of the country which is not on the list, unfortunately you still have to submit a tuberculosis test if you have been residing in one of these countries for more than 6 months. And also, if you are a national of one of these countries but were residing in another country which is not on this list, you will be expected to submit a tuberculosis test certificate if you were residing in that country which is not on this list for less than 6 months. However, if you lived in another country which is not on this list for more than 6 months, then this means you don't need to submit a tuberculosis test certificate. So this was our procedural part, and the switching rules. If you follow the correct procedure and if you're not applying in one of these categories, it's highly likely that you will meet validity requirements, and then the decision maker will proceed to the next step of ensuring that you meet the suitability requirements. If you are making your entry clearance application, if you're applying from outside the UK, you have to prove to the decision maker that none of the paragraphs at Part 9 of the immigration rules applies. And if you're applying in the UK, in addition to Part 9, you also have to show that you are not an overstay in this country. And if you are, then paragraph 39E still allows you to make an application and that you are not an immigration bail. So let me show you how you can meet the suitability requirements. So if you go to your browser and you type Part 9 immigration rules, the .gov.uk website is going to be the one you need. And here you can see grounds for refusal or cancellation of entry clearance, permission to enter or permission to stay, and also the additional grounds for refusal of entry or arrival in the UK. And we have the additional grounds for those who are making their application in the UK. I invite you to explore this part yourself, but just to give you a very brief summary, if let's say you have an exclusion or deportation order which is still valid, and then the application will be refused. So when you see the words must be refused, this means that this is a mandatory ground for refusal and the decision maker has no choice and they have to refuse your application. Or if decision maker believes that your presence in the UK is not conducive to the public goods and because of your conduct, character, associations or any other reasons, this is a very broad paragraph, the application will be refused. So there is no discretion there. There are criminality grounds, exclusion for asylum and humanitarian protection grounds. Also, if someone was involved in a sham marriage before, this may be one of the grounds for refusal. But here, unlike the paragraphs above, we can see that the decision maker has a choice, has a discretion, so they can either allow or refuse the application. And that is because we have this word may here. Also, if someone made false representations, the applications may be refused on suitability grounds, or if someone was in breach of immigration rules, or if they have debts to NHS over £500. So guys, just open this section and make sure that none of the suitability requirements applies. And even if it does, if we see the word may in the paragraph, this means that there is still a discretion and the application may still be allowed. However, I strongly suggest that if you think that you can be caught by one of the grounds mentioned at Part 9, I suggest that you rectify this situation before you make your application. So let's say you have debts to NHS for at least £500. Before making an application, I suggest that you repay these debts, or the same as with unpaid litigation costs. If you have them, just repay them before making the application, and don't hope that the decision maker will be making a discretion for you. If someone applies in the UK, they should not be on immigration bail, and also they should not be overstayers, so they have to have a valid visa when they're applying. There are some exceptions explained at paragraph 39E, where they say that if you became an overstayer, so for example, if your visa expired, this will be disregarded if you make your next visa application within 14 days, and with your application you provide the decision maker with evidence confirming that there were good reasons beyond your control which prevented you from making your application on time. In these circumstances, there are still chances of the application being accepted as valid and you meeting the suitability requirements. But of course, I strongly suggest that if you're already in the UK, you always submit your application before the expiry of your visa. So once you prove that you meet the validity requirements and the suitability requirements, the next step will be to show that you meet all the eligibility requirements. The UK graduate trainee visa is a points-based application, and therefore the eligibility requirements consist of two parts: the points-based requirements and non-points-based requirements. For the applicants to meet the points-based requirement, they have to score 60 points for the sponsorship, job at an appropriate skill level, and the salary elements, all 20 points each. For the sponsorship, when someone makes the application, they have to prove that they have a valid certificate of sponsorship, which was not withdrawn by the sponsor and not cancelled by the Home Office. And also the certificate of sponsorship will need to have your name, that you are being sponsored as a graduate trainee, the details of your job, a salary, and any allowance that your sponsor is offering you, your pay details, when you intend to start your employment. This should not be more than 3 months after the date of the application, and that you have worked for the sponsor group for a continuous period of at least 3 months. And if any provisions of Appendix ATAS applies, then you'll need to submit a certificate as well. Let me show you how you can check if Appendix ATAS applies. So if you go to your browser and you insert Appendix ATAS, the .gov.uk website is the one you need. And if you apply in any of these categories and you are not exempt because you are from one of these countries, this means that you will need to submit the certificate together with the application. Secondly, there are certain requirements which the sponsors will need to meet. They have to be rated, and they have to be registered and licensed and authorized by the Home Office to sponsor a graduate trainee. And the final element of the sponsorship requirement is the Geniusness Requirement. So the sponsor has to show that job exists and there is a genuine need for you to do this job. It's not a sham job. So in other words, it was not created purely to enable you to enter the UK and to get a visa in this category. And also the sponsor meets the third-party rules. The third-party rules mean that your sponsor didn't hire you to provide services to a third party to fill a position with that party, and it doesn't really matter whether it's going to be on a temporary or permanent basis. This is not allowed by the rules. And secondly, that you have no intention of doing any kind of routine job or to provide an ongoing routine services to a third party, regardless of the nature or length of any arrangements between the sponsor and the third party. So these were our third party rules. If all these 3 elements are satisfied, then this means you'll get your 20 points for the sponsorship. The next element is proving that a job is at an appropriate skill level. This can be checked if you go to the appendix skilled occupations, and of course this job will have to be eligible for the global business mobility routes. The decision maker will be ensuring that the occupation code, which was given in your certificate of sponsorship, is in fact the most appropriate occupation code for this position. And they will refuse the application if they believe that the most appropriate occupation code is not eligible under the global business mobility route, or the most appropriate occupation code has a higher going rate than the proposed salary. And how are they going to make such a decision? Well, there are a number of factors which they will take into consideration when deciding whether or not the most appropriate code was given. So first of all, they will consider whether the sponsor has shown a genuine need for the job, whether you have the appropriate skills, qualifications and experience for this job, and they will check the sponsor's history of compliance with the immigration system and all other relevant information which will be submitted with the application. And another 20 points will be very easily scored if you can prove that your salary meets the general salary requirement. There are a few points to note here. The job will need to be at least at £23,100 gross a year, or at the 70% of the going rate. And to check the going rates, all you have to do is to type in your browser Global Business Mobility Going Rates for eligible occupations. Find this .gov.uk website, and as you can see, we have a section here for the graduate trainees, which is 70% of the going rate. It has to be at least £23,100, and also it has to be above this salary over here. So for example, if someone makes their application as a physical scientist, their job will need to be at the 70% of the going rate, which is £25,550. What can be included in your salary? Okay, only your guaranteed basic gross pay can be included, and any allowances which are guaranteed to be paid for the duration of your employment. For example, if you intend to work in London, then the allowance which is called London waiting can be included into calculations, or if you're going to be paid mobility premium to cover the additional costs of living in the UK. So what is London waiting? London waiting is a special allowance that employers pay to people working in certain professions. For example, if they are PhD students or civil servants, police or teachers or airline employees or security officers working in London or near London. And this particular allowance was introduced to help employees with the costs of living in London. Statistically, it is higher to live in London than in any other part of the UK. And also we have accommodation allowance, which can also be paid as part of your package. However, here we have to bear in mind that only a certain percentage can be included. So suppose your sponsor agreed to pay your allowance solely for the purpose of accommodation. In this case, they will only take into consideration only the first 30% of this allowance. And here is what is not going to be accepted: flexible working hours and overtime, and that is because it cannot be guaranteed. Any additional pay, such as shifts overtime on any bonus pays or any overtime, it doesn't really matter whether or not they're going to be guaranteed. This will not be accepted. Your pension or national insurance contributions are going to be excluded from the calculations, and in-kind of benefits such as equity shares, health insurance, school or university fees, and one-off payments. Let's say at the beginning of your employment, the employer may want to pay you what is known as golden hellos. This will not be accepted. Payments relating to immigration costs or immigration health surcharge, these are not going to be included, as well as the payments to cover business expenses, including travel to and from the applicants from your country of residence, equipment, clothing, travel, etc. So these were our general salary requirements, and then you have to also remember that irrespective of how many hours you intend to work in the UK, the decision maker will only take 48 hours a week into their calculations. So if these elements are satisfied, you'll score 60 points, and then we have to move on to the non-points based requirements, and there are two. First of all, we have the financial requirements and the maximum length of assignments requirements. The financial requirements, you don't have to meet it if you are applying in the UK and you have been residing here for more than 12 months, and that is provided it was a lawful residence, or if your sponsor confirmed in their certificate of sponsorship that they intend to sponsor you for the first months. And if this doesn't apply to you, then you'll need to show that you have at least £1,270 in your bank account, and this amount was there for at least 28 consecutive days before the date of the application. With regards to the maximum length of assignment requirements, the UK graduate trainee applicants cannot remain here for more than 12 months. Or if their contract is less for 12 months, then the duration of the visa will be for the time which is mentioned on their certificate of sponsorship plus 14 days. So let's say your employer, your sponsor wants you to work here for 6 months, then your visa will be for 6 months and 14 days. And when checking if you meet the maximum length of assignment requirements, the decision maker will also be taking into consideration the time you spent in any of these categories. So all of these will be included into their calculations. So these were our points-based and non-points-based requirements. If you met the validity requirements, the suitability requirements, and the eligibility requirements, your application is going to be granted. However, if it was refused, your only legal remedy will be to apply for an administrative review. We already discussed the duration, so it's going to be for up to 12 months, or if the contract is going to be shorter than for 12 months, it's going to be whatever is stated on your certificate of sponsorship plus 14 days. And there are certain conditions which you need to comply with when your application is granted. You can only work for your sponsor. You can study in the UK. You can come here together with your spouse and dependent children under the age of 18. You can volunteer and you can travel abroad. You cannot claim benefits. Some exceptions apply. You cannot change jobs or do any other second job, and this particular route doesn't lead to settlement, so you will not be able to apply for indefinite leave to remain. And this was a very simple and straightforward UK graduate trainee route.